What's up, guys? Welcome back to SPOOKTOBER21. Welcome back to Project Potter. My name is Kyle, your host. Guys, welcome to night 29 of Spooktober, guys. This is our second to last movie, our penultimate episode, guys. We are doing the classic 1996 movie Scream. Once again, guys, a first-time watch for me. And let me say this one is much better than last night's Nightmare on Elm Street. So I was very glad about that. And I definitely have some thoughts on this movie that is much different, I think, than pretty much any horror movie that I've seen before for good reasons. And yeah, if you guys haven't seen the channel before, welcome. Go check out the other content, of course. If you guys do like this content, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing. For all of our reviews here, what we do is we do a quick recap. And I think this will actually be a quicker recap because there's a lot going on in this movie, but I'm not going to go beat for beat. I'm just going to hit like kind of the big points there. You guys hopefully have gone and seen the movie before, so you know kind of what happens, but I'm just going to touch on sort of the recap, my best scenes, the worst scenes, my favorite character, my least favorite character, and a score out of 10. So you guys have know the format by now. Yeah, appreciate you guys, and here we go. So Scream, guys, they've made at least 4 of these movies, I think. We're just doing the first one for this one. This is a 1996 movie, and there are parts of this movie that are very 1996 because, like, they're like, oh, give me the cellular. And I'm like, it's so weird to hear them say, like, give me the cellular, or like, why do you have a cell phone? And it's like now everyone's, you can do everything from your phone all the time now. So it's just, this movie is definitely a kind of a sign of the times, and it's good. It's fun to look back on that and see like how this stands up as like almost like a time capsule. Yeah, guys, this starts off with poor Drew Barrymore in the house, and she's making popcorn. And I have an issue with this opening scene because she gets a call. And everyone knows, like, I know of Scream. I haven't seen this movie before, but I know, like, I've obviously seen The Mask. I'm pretty sure I've worn that costume as a kid for Halloween multiple times, and I had no idea. I thought it was just like a Halloween costume. I didn't know it was from Scream. I'm sure a lot of kids probably did the same thing. Yeah, I knew, like, there's a call's coming from inside the house or whatever, which I thought was this movie, but it's actually a different movie. But it's the same idea where there's a mysterious caller, and then they're like, oh, stop calling. Drew Barrymore is like, okay, real funny. And she hangs up. The phone rings again. She picks it up, and then she starts to get a little scared, but she's like, okay, stop calling. And then they're like, go look on the front porch. And then she's like, that's when it gets scary. Anyway, guys, like I said, I'm not going to go beat for beat. I have a big problem with this opening scene. One portion of it is she gets scared, and Drew Barrymore's freaking out. She's making the popcorn, right? And this movie is very meta, where it talks about like, oh, I think the killer asked her, what's your favorite movie? And she's like crying, and she's like, Nightmare on Elm Street. And after watching that last night, I'm like, how is that your favorite movie, dude? Like, no, that's probably why she died, because she said Nightmare on Elm Street. If she said any other movie, I think she would have been safe there. But she's scared, and she goes over, and she like knows that the popcorn is about to catch on fire, start burning. She goes over, she gets right next to the popcorn, and she doesn't fucking take the popcorn off. And I'm like, what are you doing? Because like he asked her another question, and then she's like literally reaching for the popcorn, and then she's like, oh well, and I'm like, just move the popcorn while you're talking on the phone. It's okay. Then there's no fire in the house. It's like, anyway, that just bugged me, honestly. But eventually the killer in this mask behind me, we find out obviously at the end they're using a voice changer, but we don't find that out till the very end. And the whole mystery of this movie is finding out who the killer is, which is nice because I was going through the movie and I was like, oh, I had like 3 or 4 suspects where I was like, okay. And then I was hoping that it wasn't obvious, because I was like, with like 45 minutes to go, I was like, I really hope it's not this person, because that would be obvious. And then they had a twist at the end there, but we won't jump ahead that far yet. We will do some recap here, guys. But as you guys know, if you've seen Project Potter reviews before, I'm just going off memory, and I always forget things out of order. And so we'll try our best to not do that, but I'm not going to make you a promise that I can't keep. So yeah, Drew Barrymore ends up dying. A couple weird things in this movie where she gets stabbed in the like chest and the neck, and then she's able to get up, and like her parents are getting home, and somehow they don't notice their daughter, who's like bleeding and stabbed, and a man chasing her in a fucking costume. And she like goes to say mom, but her throat is obviously all messed up from being stabbed. But the fact that she can like get up and even just like kind of run over, I was like, all right, well, I don't think you would be able to move, but who knows like how that works. So I don't want to nitpick too much, guys, but there are the same like horror tropes or the same things that are going on happen in this movie. But she ends up dying, and then they freak out. So that's the first murder. And then we meet our main character, played by Neve Campbell. And guys, I don't know what's going on with this horror theme where you put a real attractive woman as the lead. I'm fine with it. I mean, that's fine with me. But yeah, we get Neve Campbell, who's just excellent, and the cast for the most part is very good in this movie. But she's like right away trying to figure out, like, she's intelligent and she's trying to figure things out, and she's like, oh, that's strange. And they're like, oh, the killer might be on the loose, and there's like a couple of jump scares where they're like, ah, and it's just like people being like, hey, how are you? And she's got her group of friends. There's a great scene in there where they're talking. Well, it's a good scene, but it's also kind of weird because they're talking about like, oh, well, it must have been a man to kill it. And they're like, well, what do you mean it couldn't have been a woman? And they're like, well, no, a man's got to do that. And it's a really nice dialogue piece because these are just conversations that like you would have with your friends, right? Where they're like, okay, who's the killer? And then like, oh, there would be someone that says, oh, it has to be a man. And it's like, well, no, why wouldn't it be a woman? And a lot of scenes in this movie are great because they're like breaking the fourth wall where it's like, it's just conversations. I mean, there's literally a scene in this movie, guys, where they're watching Halloween and they get the Halloween music, which I was shocked at. I was like, wow, that's so cool. Again, I don't want to like spend time on all of the plot here, guys, but there's like a main crew. There's a reporter played by Courtney Cox, and she's kind of like, I don't want to say the antagonist because she's really not. She's just doing her job. But there's a scene where Neve punches her in the face and she's like, I'll send you a copy, boom. And then there's a funny scene where they're like, I'll send you a copy, boom, super bitch. And I'm like, no, not really, dude. She was just mad because like reporters can be, in paparazzi can be very annoying where they're always tracking these people down. And they're like, dude, it's just a party going on here. But obviously the reporter plays a huge role at the end here, guys. It's going through. There's different things. I thought the principal was the killer for a little bit there. And then there's even a scene where they know, I think, that this is a Wes Craven film, and he knew that like the audience must have been thinking that too, because there's literally a scene where the principal, because some douchebag goes in there, takes the costume that's like readily available and like is running through the school, which is fucked up as a prank. And the principal takes the mask, he puts it on, and he's like, he takes it off, and he's like, and he's like, nah. And it's like, dude. And then he gets killed like right after that. But I was like, that's pretty good, because I was like, I don't think it's the principal, but I was like, it would be a nice twist if it was. And then he gets killed like right after. I was like, okay, so rule him out. Then he gets hung up by the goalpost because all the kids are at the party at the end there, and they're watching Halloween, and there's a great scene that I love. So once again, guys, we're gonna kind of, so sorry, you know what? Let me do this. Do you think after 29 nights that I would have this format down, Pat? But I've just started to kind of recap and put the best scenes together because they kind of overlap a little bit. So instead of doing recap, the best scenes and worst scenes, guys, we're just going to mix it all together like we've done before. And so I want to finish the recap here first, though, the brief, abbreviated, messy recap. But guys, if you're coming to this channel, you're not expecting professional quality reviews, okay? You're getting a little tickle of Project Potter. You're getting a little spice. You're getting a little extra something here, okay? I'm putting my own twist on it, okay? Just like the twist at the end of the movie, guys, where we find out that there are two killers, or there's a tag team with Billy. Is it Stu? I think his name is Stu and Billy. We're gonna go with that. If that's not correct, I'll edit in here, but I think that's right. And I was like, okay, interesting twist. But then they have a really weird plan where I guess they're both just fucking crazy. And so they started killing, and one of them is using the voice thing. And I don't know if they were like dressing up. Were they both putting on the costume while one was in the other room? I don't know. That was kind of weird. But they're like, oh, well, don't worry, because Sydney's mom apparently died a year ago to the day, although I don't think we ever see that, which is weird that we open up with Drew Barrymore's character dying, because that's obviously not Sydney's mom. So that, to me, that felt like a separate portion from the rest of the movie. I thought that was kind of strange. We find out that Sydney's mom died a year ago, and then at the end here it's revealed that Billy, who was like the boyfriend that she was initially frames, because like the killer's chasing her, and then Billy shows up right after, and it's like really obvious that you're like, oh, okay, so is Billy the killer? Because like a cell phone drops out of his pocket, so they arrest him, and he's like, come on, you know me. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's not him. That's not the killer, because that would be way too obvious. Then they check the phone records. The phone records are clean. And I don't know if they ever explained that, but I think it was someone else making the calls, and that was a decoy or misdirection with the cell phone. I'm not entirely sure, but that's how I took it. And so Billy, we think, is safe. And so eventually at the end, he hooks up with Sydney because she's a virgin. And then it's weird because she asks him like, oh, are you sure you're not the killer or whatever? Because you'd use your one call to call the dad, your dad. But then she's like, but I saw the sheriff call your dad. And he's like, oh yeah, when I called, he didn't pick up. And I was like, oh, okay. For me, I was like, oh, that's sad. Like, that's too bad that, or like maybe he just missed the call. You know what I mean? And so she's like, And then Sydney is awesome because she is always like, there's a scene in the beginning, guys, where she gets the call and she's like, oh yeah, good try, Randy, or whatever. And they're like, it's not Randy. And she's like, okay, horror movies are just big breasted women who can't act and, you know, they can't escape or whatever. And it's so cool that they're like, yeah, this is what every horror movie is. And so they're trying to like parody that, but also they're like, this is kind of what's happening in this movie as well. There's an amazing scene, I think, where they're watching Halloween and they're all huddled around, and then they talk about like they call it the obligatory tit shot, which is funny because it's true. Almost every horror movie has just some nudity for some nudity's sake and a sex scene or whatever. And then the kid stands up, the kid in the green, I forget his name. He ends up like surviving at the end, but he stands up, and I love that scene because he's like, okay, there's rules. And they're like, what are you talking about? And he's like, whoa, you don't know the rules? He's like, number 1, can't have sex. And they're like, boo. And he's like, no, seriously, this is what happens in every horror movie. He's like, you can't have sex. He's like, you can't do drugs or drink. And they're all drinking and they're like, boo. And they're like, you know, cheersing and stuff. And I was like, this is great. And also this is what would happen at a party. And then he's like, number 3, he says like, look behind you or whatever. I forget what he says, but it's like 3 rules that are like genuinely true, and it's just great. And then like there's a scene where they're on like a 30-second tape delay where the reporter's outside and the killer is behind him, and he's watching Halloween. He's like, look behind you, Jamie Lee, like you're yelling at the screen like you would a horror movie. And then of course the killer's behind him and they're like, look behind you. But then they look in the open door and they're like, oh my God, we're on a 30-second delay. So he's already been stabbed in the back. All that stuff was genius and brilliant. I loved all that stuff. The twist at the end here where we find out it's Stu and Billy is weird because I didn't understand their motives. I don't know if they were just both fucking crazy, but they were just like, oh yeah, well, what we're going to do is like, I mean, Billy explains that his, I think, father was sleeping with, he calls like Sydney's mother a whore or something. But it was like really quick and I wasn't really sure what was going on. Like, I guess that was his motivation, but basically they like tied her dad up and they're like, okay, well, here's the voice changer. Here's the knife or whatever, or the gun. And they're like, you know, he went crazy and he killed everyone and then shot himself. And in my head, I'm thinking like, okay, I know it was 90s, but I'm just thinking DNA wise. I'm like, your fingerprints are all over this gun. Your fingerprints are all over this house. And like, I know the technology wasn't as advanced as it is now, but I'm like, there's no way that you would have gotten away with this, dude. They would have been like, why are your fingerprints on that? And I think even in the 90s, and I think this takes place, I know the movie was made in 96 or released in 96. I think this movie is present day back then. So I think it's early 90s or mid 90s, but I don't know. But I'm like, there must have been fingerprinting. Like, I'm sure that they would not have gotten away with that. So that was kind of like a plot hole for me. But I'm just like, are these two dudes just kind of crazy? Or like I think his name was Stu, the tall guy. That guy, I was kind of disappointed he was involved because that was the one obvious one where like he was way too relaxed and way too like goofy the whole time. And I was like, well, obviously it's this dude. Like, so I'm glad it wasn't just him, but they have like this conversation where they're like, their plan is to stab each other, but they're like, remember, don't hit me in the arteries or don't go too deep. And they actually stab each other because they're like, oh, well, we have to like be left for dead and then we're going to survive. And I'm like, okay, I get it, but like shoot yourself in the foot or something. Like literally, don't like stab your stomach, dude. Like use the gun, and maybe that's where the fingerprints come in, but then they just use the gun to place it in the dad. So that part where I was like, and because then Stu gets stabbed and then he's like, yo, help me get her or whatever. And he's like, dude, you stabbed me too deep. He's like, I'm dying. And I was like, well, no shit, you're dying, dude. Like, that's a terrible plan. So that was a little strange at the end because they talk about how they use like pig's blood and stuff. And because I was like, how the hell is Billy still alive? But he rolls down the stairs and then he's like, guess what? It was pig's blood. But then the rest of the people are actually dead. And so it was just, that part was a little weird for me. It kind of fell apart a little bit, but they're basically both just like nuts and they're just like trying to murder everyone there. And then the reporter, Courtney Cox, comes back at the end and then shoots him. But there's a great scene where they're like, he's like, careful, this is the part where the supposedly dead killer has one last scare. And then he's like, and then they shoot him in the head, and she's like, not in my movie. And I was like, okay, I like that, because it's like, this is true. This is exactly what has happened in horror movies. They address it, and they're like, nah, bro, we're good. So, yeah, this movie was very meta and very aware of itself, and not quite a parody, but not quite like a comedy. I think it's a really thin line there. But yeah, that's kind of, like I said, the recap, the best scenes. I don't really have worse scenes. I kind of just have a couple nitpicks, like I said, those couple things at the end there. But all in all, because this movie doesn't take itself too seriously at all, it can kind of do some things and be like, oh, that's weird. But then it's like, oh, but then they address it or they acknowledge it. So I think that was all good. And so that is kind of our recap, our best scenes, and kind of our worst scenes all in one. Hey guys, we will do the best character though in a separate category. It's Sydney. It's Neve Campbell, dude. 100%. She's attractive. She's smart. She's cunning. She's trying to figure everything out. She's not happy with like anything that goes down. She's brave, and she's just figuring out the mystery, dude. She's never like, oh, okay, don't worry about it. She's not like a ditz, or she's not like that like character just to advance the plot, or she's not just the like sexual object. She is the lead character, and she's, I think, the best character in this movie because she's just great, and she's relatable, and she gets mad at the reporter initially, and then she realizes that maybe she was too hard on the reporter. And so it's nice to see them kind of mend that relationship. And like, she sleeps with Billy, and then she is still like, but is it you? And at that point I was like, no, dude, Billy's clean. Like, because he wasn't like overacting, or wasn't doing anything that I thought could still make him the killer. I thought it was just going to be Stu. And so for him to be involved in that, I was like, so this dude is crazy. And it's so messed up that they said, tell her at the end, like, you slept with like a psychopath or whatever. And I'm like, damn, dude, don't rub salt in the wound. Like, but yeah, I thought Neve Campbell was awesome as Sydney, and I thought she was the best character. She was just fantastic on all fronts. And like I said, the cast is very good. There wasn't really any. I think Stu was the most annoying. He was the most obvious choice that I didn't like, but I think everyone else was really good. And Sydney, I thought, stood out more than most. Also, guys, I want to give a shout out to Dewey because he was awesome too. But then I was also at one point being like, this dude is way too likable. He's like my dark horse that could be the killer because he's so likable that you're like, you would never expect him to do it. But yeah, Dewey was awesome from start to finish. And like when they embarrassed him in front, he's like, that's my superior officer. He's like, come on, man. And he was great. So honorable mention or shout out for him as well. Okay, guys, my worst character. I am sorry to Matthew Lillard, but Stu, man, I hated you. You were too unlikable for me. And it got to a point where not only were you really calm in all the situations where everyone else was freaking out. And I love the scene where they go in the movie store, like a Blockbuster or whatever. And I miss Blockbuster. I miss those stores because I grew up with those. And now there's like maybe like 2 in America left. So it was so fun to go in there and see the new releasers and see the horror movies and all that stuff. And yeah, that was like a fun Friday night when you go there and you're like looking for the game or the movie and it's sold out, or like you have to check to see if there's any copies, or they just have like a blue box on there and you're like, oh, and you have to pay for the rental. And that was all great. That's a part. Look, it's great that we can stream everything. I just like popped on the AMC Plus app here and threw on this movie, and it's great. It's super convenient, but part of me misses that time where it's like, oh man, you drive there with your family, go to Blockbuster Friday night or whatever. But anyway, guys, yeah, Stu to me was just like so obviously either the main killer or part of it, because I was just like, dude's way too calm. Dude is really annoying, and he like didn't take the pranks seriously when she's like, why, like when they're running through the hallway in the Scream outfit and they're like, he's like, oh, come on, lighten up or whatever. I'm like, oh, dude, like you should have been like, oh, that's fucked up. Like, why would someone do that? But he was just like, oh, no, that's cool. And I'm like, oh, well, dude, be more obvious about it. And just the fact that he was like, oh, I'll cut your face off or whatever, that conversation they have at the water in front of the waterfall or the water fountain at the beginning there, guys, I thought that was a little too obvious. And then if I went back and watched that, I think I would probably watch Billy and Stu's interaction, because the two of them were both like, Billy was kind of defending Sydney at that point, but yeah, Stu I just thought stood out, and not in a good way. I just thought he was pretty annoying, and honestly, he was like, I pay attention, so every time like he every time the killer was there, I would be like, in my head, I'm thinking like, okay, where's Stu, or where did Stu go? Or, we haven't checked in on Stu. So I was kind of like, okay, he could have easily, like, when he's like, I'll be back. And I'm like, okay, kind of a funny line for sure. But then also he like left, and then that girl ended up dying. That poor girl ended up dying in the garage or whatever. And I was just like, okay, you could have easily just slipped it on. So personally, I thought it was too obvious. I wish they would have hidden his character or made it a little bit easier or a little bit harder to guess. But yeah, Stu was my least favorite. Okay, guys, that brings us to the score. Guys, this is a much better film than Nightmare on Elm Street. Thank God, because I was like, I was feeling like such a letdown last night, and then to bounce back with this. And again, this is a first time watch for me, which we've had a bunch of in Spooktober. But I was like, I didn't really know what Scream was. I was like, is this a parody? Is this a serious movie? Is it a mixture of both? I don't know. I wasn't thrilled about the beginning with Drew Barrymore. I was like, this is like too weird for me. I was like, it's too crazy. Now that the movie's over and I can process it, I still don't love that opening bit, but just because it felt so separate from the rest of the movie. But I guess it does kind of like set the tone of been like, this killer is serious and they're messed up, and it's like lighthearted for them. And the fact that he like cuts their insides open and then like hangs them up. I don't know what the deal is with like hanging them up, dude. That was kind of weird. But yeah, this movie is a 9.3 for me. I really, really love this movie. The only reason it's not closer to like a 10 is not because I didn't want to give it another 10, because if a movie is worthy of the 10, guys, I'll be giving out 10s all day long, but only if it's worthy of it. The things I mentioned, guys, where Stu being too obvious as one, definitely involved in the killings. The beginning bit with Drew Barrymore, just like I said, felt like a different movie, and I know it was the same killer and everything, but it was just a really weird way. They threw you like right into that, where it was like 1 minute into the movie, and I had to like check to make sure I didn't have to like rewind it, like it started in the middle of the movie or something. I was like, okay, and I don't mind movies that go right into it, but I want a little bit of build up, I want a little bit of something. So that felt kind of weird to me. Also, well, I don't want to be mean to Drew Barrymore, so I will keep my thoughts to myself on that one. But at one point in this movie, guys, I will say I had like 4 possible suspects. Like I said, I mentioned that Dewey could be like a dark horse. I didn't think that the Courtney Cox's character, the reporter, was going to be the killer. But I also was like, you're also showing up at all of these locations. And I was like, why do you need to be here? And I know your job is to report it. I know you're trying to get the breaking story. But I was kind of like, I could maybe see her being the killer. And especially because they mentioned the killer could be a woman. So then I was like, I think it is a woman, because they want to show you like, this is not your average movie. But then like the man, or the killer would have like grunts, and like, not that she couldn't have grunted like that, but it was like pretty obvious that it was a man, I would say. And I was like, okay, so it probably is one of the guys. But I think that would have been really nice if they had her do it. I mean, for a brief moment, I thought that, I thought the principal could have been it for sure. And I'm glad that they put that scene in there, so I didn't feel crazy. And then obviously I mentioned Stu. I thought maybe for like a split second, like the sheriff could have been it, but that was like I didn't really believe that. Also, guys, a scene I want to shout out when the reporter, I should call her by her character's name, Gail Weathers. When Gail gets in the van, and that's after her camera guy, who she was really mean to, and she said like, move your fat tub of lard ass. And I was like, whoa, dude, calm down. This dude's not just going to be recording at all times. Okay, he's got to get the camera. That thing's heavy. He's got to put it up there. When Gail gets in the van and she puts the wipers on and it smears the blood, I was like, oh, that's a nice effect, dude. And then when I think it's Kenny. It might be Kenny, played by W. Earl Brown. If not, I'll fix that in here, guys. But when he's like on the top and he's like sliding down, and she's like trying to use the wipers, and she's like, Kenny, I'm sorry, but get off my windshield. I was like, that's a good line there. But yeah, the best part about this movie is that I was trying to figure out who the killer was from like 20 minutes in, and I had a good idea, but at one point, guys, like I said, I had like 4 different people that I was like, I don't know. It could be any of these people. And so I love a movie that keeps me guessing like that. I love all of the stuff where they referenced, not only were they like referenced true things of horror movies, where they said like, number 1, don't have sex, don't do when they say don't say, I think that was number 3. He's like, don't say I'll be right back, or don't go away, don't be right back, don't do sex or drugs, and like all that stuff was great. I thought that anytime they referenced like, oh, well, and if this were a horror movie, then you would be the prime suspect. And he's like, I understand that. And I was like, all that stuff was awesome. And it was like right on the line of being cheesy. And at some points I was like, they're doing this a little too much. But it was always so well done where I was like, yeah, this works for me. And so that was all awesome because I didn't honestly know who the killer, or in fact, killers. And I don't know, I'll have to look it up. I don't know if they were switching costumes, or they're just working together and one was making the phone calls while the other one was out in the costume. But I would like to know why Billy and Stu teamed up. I think Billy had some sort of motivation with the mother. But again, that's kind of just like, I feel like quickly, we didn't get a ton of stuff on the mother. We just kind of decided that, like, there's a quick scene with Sydney and Gail where they talk about, oh, your mother was murdered or whatever. And then she's like, no, you think you saw this, but it was actually this or whatever. I'm butchering it, but I would have liked more on, okay, like instead of Drew Barrymore dying in the opening scene, I would have liked her mother to die. Not that I want her mother to die, but I would have liked that to be the opening scene so I can go, oh, okay. And then it says like 1 year later. And then we go to Sydney. And then it's like, oh, okay, we saw how her mother died. And then guess what? There was a twist, or this isn't what it seemed like in the opening scene. I think that would have been much better. But other than that, guys, it was an excellent film. I loved that they had all the scenes from the horror movies. And I can't believe they got the Halloween music to play in there. Like, they must have paid a bunch of money for that, or they just didn't care about copyright, because like when that happened, I was like, holy shit, this is awesome. I just think it was a very fun movie, and I'll probably end up watching the other ones, but this is like probably the best one. I would assume I'll have to maybe do like a quick Rotten Tomato search and see if the other ones are worth watching, but I almost want this experience to be like on its own and be like, okay, Scream. Yeah, this is my experience of Scream, and that we're going to leave it at that. So yeah, just, I think a fun movie and a good watch for sure. Okay, guys, that's another night of Spooktober 21. Guys, that is the penultimate night. So we have one more movie tomorrow night, guys. So stick around for that. And then that is going to be it for Spooktober 21. So thank you guys for joining me. Thanks for checking out the channel. Appreciate you guys. Go check out the other content, of course. Until tomorrow night, guys, stay spooky.